They say money cannot buy class, but Harrison Sterling made a fatal error assuming luxury lived in his suit, rather than the woman he just called trash. He had no idea that while my hand trembled clutching the silver fork, I was not scared. I was calculating the liquidity value of the empire he spent a lifetime building. I am about to buy it with cash from a secondary account. A true predator never growls. She simply smiles and cuts the check. My name is Veronica Lancaster, and for the last 5 years, I have lived 2 very distinct lives. In one, I am the shadow architect of the global digital infrastructure, the silent majority shareholder of Aurora Holdings, and a woman who can crash a stock market with a single encrypted email. In the other, the life I was currently enduring, I was merely the owner of a dusty, struggling antique bookstore in the city, a woman with a mid-range sedan and a boyfriend whose last name weighed more than the gold reserves of Fort Knox. Tonight, inside the suffocating opulence of Sterling Manor, I was not the predator. I was the bait. The drive to the Hamptons had been a quiet procession into the belly of the beast. Sterling Manor sat on the cliffs like a tombstone for the Gilded Age, a sprawling monstrosity of stone and glass that screamed for attention while simultaneously barring entry to anyone without a 10-figure net worth. The ocean crashed against the rocks below, a violent, rhythmic reminder of nature's power. But inside, the air was stagnant. It smelled of lemon polish, old money, and the distinct, metallic scent of desperation. I smoothed the fabric of my dress. It was a simple black sheath, vintage, understated, and devoid of logos. To the untrained eye, it looked like something picked off a rack at a department store sale. To a connoisseur, the hand-stitching whispered of a Parisian atelier that did not advertise. Harrison Sterling was not a connoisseur. He was a man who believed price tags were meant to be worn on the outside. We were seated in the dining hall, a cavernous room where the ceiling was so high the shadows seemed to have their own weather system. A chandelier the size of a small car hung precariously above us, dripping with crystal teardrops. The table was set for 12, though only 6 of us were present. There was Julian, looking pale and tense beside me, his father, Harrison's latest trophy wife, who looked terrified to breathe too loudly, and 2 business partners from a venture capital firm that I happened to know was currently under investigation for fraud. The servants moved like ghosts. They were dressed in crisp uniforms, their faces blank slates of servitude, pouring wine and clearing plates with a silence that was almost unnerving. They were the only honest people in the room. Harrison sat at the head of the table, a throne-like chair with a high back that framed his silver hair. He was 60, but he wore his age like a weapon. His skin was tanned from weeks on his yacht, and his teeth were capped in a white so blinding it looked predatory. He swirled his scotch, the ice clinking against the glass, a sound that punctuated his monologue about the decline of American industry. He had not addressed me directly since we arrived, save for a dismissive nod that one might give to a stray cat that had wandered into the garden. "The problem with the market today," Harrison boomed, his voice echoing off the mahogany walls, "is that we have let the rabble in. Meritocracy is a lie sold to the poor to keep them working. True leadership, true power, comes from lineage. It is about blood. It is about breeding." He took a sip of his drink, his eyes sliding over his business partners. Seeking validation, they nodded sycophantically, cutting into their steaks with vigor. "Take horses, for example," Harrison continued, his gaze finally flickering toward me. "You do not race a plow horse at the Kentucky Derby. It is cruel to the animal, and it is an insult to the sport. Some creatures are born to pull heavy loads in the mud, and others are born to run in the sun. It is biology. It is destiny." I focused on my plate. The food was exquisite, a truffle risotto that probably cost more than my supposed monthly rent, but it turned to ash in my mouth. Beside me, I felt Julian stiffen. His hand found mine under the table, his grip tight, clammy. He was silently begging me to endure it, to let the wave crash over us so we could leave. "Father," Julian said, his voice strained. Perhaps we can discuss something else. Veronica has been reading a fascinating biography on. I am sure she has. Harrison cut him off, not even looking at his son. Books are a fine hobby for those who have the time to dream because they cannot do. Tell me, Veronica, how is your little shop? Did you manage to sell enough paperbacks this month to pay the electric bill? Or did Julian have to write another check to keep the lights on? The table went silent. The business partners exchanged amused glances. The trophy wife stared intently at her salad. I raised my head. I kept my expression neutral, a mask of polite confusion. The shop is doing fine, Mr. Sterling. We actually specialize in rare first editions. It is a niche market, but a stable one. Harrison let out a short, barking laugh. Stable. That is a cute word. Stability is for the middle class. We talk about legacy here. We talk about empires. He leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table, invading the personal space of everyone present. Julian tells me you are from Ohio, a farm girl, was it? My father was a schoolteacher. I lied smoothly. My father was actually a data analyst for the NSA, but that was a classified lifetime ago. A teacher, Harrison sneered. Noble, poor, but noble. See? Gentlemen. This is exactly what I mean. We invite people to the table who have never seen a fork with 3 tines, and we expect them to know which one to use. It is exhausting. The pressure in the room was physical. It pressed against my temples. I could feel the arrogance radiating off him like heat from a furnace. He was a man standing on a crumbling foundation, lecturing the world on architecture. I knew his financials better than he did. I knew that Sterling Heavy Industries had missed its last 3 quarterly targets. I knew he was leveraging his personal properties to cover the interest on shipping loans. I knew that the legacy he spoke of was currently graded as junk status by 3 major credit agencies. But tonight, I was just the plow horse. Harrison, one of the partners said, trying to diffuse the tension, though his tone was mocking. Let us not bore the young lady with talk of bloodlines. She is a guest. Is she? Harrison's eyes locked onto mine. They were cold, blue, and empty. A guest is someone you invite because you want their company. This is charity. This is my son trying to play savior to a stray. Julian slammed his hand on the table. The silverware jumped. That is enough, Dad. Harrison did not flinch. He slowly unrolled his linen napkin, wiped his mouth with deliberate precision, and then, with a flick of his wrist, threw the crumpled fabric onto the center of the table. It landed in the butter dish, a white flag of war. He looked straight at me, his face devoid of humor. You think I do not know what this is, Harrison said, his voice dropping to a low, venomous register. You think because you put on a clean dress and learn to keep your mouth shut that you fit in. You do not. You look at this room and you see dollar signs. You look at my son and you see a ticket out of mediocrity. Father, stop it, Julian shouted, pushing his chair back. You sit down, Harrison roared, his voice cracking like a whip. You sit down, Julian, or so help me God. I will call the lawyers in the morning and write you out of the will before breakfast. You want to play the hero. Go ahead, walk out that door with her, but know that if you do, you leave with nothing but the clothes on your back. No trust fund, no apartment, no future. You will be just as poor as she is. Julian froze. He was half standing, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of the table. I looked up at him. I saw the anger in his eyes, hot and righteous. But beneath it, I saw the fear. He was an architect, an artist, a man of gentle soul who had been beaten down by this tyrant for 30 years. He was not weak. He was conditioned, the threat of losing his ability to build, to create, to live the life he knew, was a chain around his neck. Harrison smiled, a cruel, twisting of lips. That is what I thought. Sit down, boy. Slowly, agonizingly, Julian sank back into his chair. He could not look at me. He stared at his lap, his shoulders hunched, defeated. The silence that followed was heavy, thick with Julian's shame and Harrison's triumph. I did not look at Julian. I did not want to add to his humiliation. Instead, I kept my gaze fixed on Harrison. He was expecting tears. He was expecting me to run out of the room sobbing, or perhaps to start screaming insults like a cornered animal. He wanted a reaction that would prove his point that I was emotional, unstable, and unrefined. I felt a coldness spread through my chest. It was not the cold of fear. It was the icy clarity of a decision made. In my mind, I was no longer in the dining room. I was in the boardroom. I was looking at a liability that needed to be liquidated. I reached for my wine glass. My hand was perfectly steady. The crystal was cool against my fingertips. I lifted it, took a small, measured sip of the vintage red, a 1996 Bordeaux that was, admittedly, excellent, and then I lowered the glass. I set it down on the mahogany table with a deliberate movement. Clink. The sound was sharp, distinct, in the breathless silence of the room. It rang out like the strike of a judge's gavel sentencing a criminal. I folded my hands in my lap and met Harrison's gaze. I did not blink. I stripped away the mask of the shy bookseller, letting the steel of the CEO shine through for just a fraction of a second. "Thank you for dinner, Harrison," I said, my voice soft but carrying to every corner of the room. "And thank you for showing me the true value of the Sterling Group." For a second, confusion flickered in his eyes. He had expected an apology or a tearful exit. He did not know how to process gratitude. But then, his arrogance reasserted itself. He interpreted my words through the only filter he possessed, his own superiority. He leaned back in his throne, picking up his glass again, a smirk playing on his lips. "Value," he scoffed, shaking his head at his partners. "She talks about value. Look at her, trying to keep a shred of dignity. It is almost sad. Go on, then. Take your pride and go. It is the only thing you can afford." He thought he had won. He thought he had crushed an insect. He had absolutely no idea that he had just invited the exterminator into his home, and I had just decided that the infestation was terminal. I stood up, smoothing my dress one last time. I did not wait for Julian. I walked toward the heavy oak doors, my heels clicking rhythmically on the marble floor. 1, 2, 3. Each step was a countdown. Tomorrow, the markets would open. Tomorrow, the world would change. Tonight, Harrison Sterling dined like a king. By the end of the week, he would be lucky to afford a seat at a diner. I pushed the doors open and walked out into the cool night air of the Hamptons. The wind was picking up, signaling a storm. It was perfect weather for a hostile takeover. The heavy oak doors of Sterling Manor clicked shut behind me, severing the connection between the suffocating heat of the dining room and the biting chill of the Atlantic wind. The sound was final, like the closing of a vault. I did not stop moving. My heels dug into the gravel of the driveway, a rhythmic crunch that grounded me, pulling me out of the performance I had just delivered and back into the reality I controlled. "Veronica. Wait." The voice was desperate, carried away by the gusting wind before it could fully reach me. I paused, my hand resting on the door handle of my sensible, mid-range gray sedan. It was the kind of car a librarian or a small business owner would drive, reliable, invisible, and completely unthreatening. It was the perfect camouflage. I turned to see Julian running down the stone steps, his tuxedo jacket flapping open, his face a mask of anguish illuminated by the golden floodlights of the manor. He looked younger than his 32 years in that moment, stripped of his composure by the brutality of his father. Please," he gasped, catching up to me, his breath visible in the night air. He reached for my hand, his fingers trembling. "Do not leave like this. I am coming with you. I will get my car. We can go back to the city. Just you and me. To hell with him." I looked at the man I loved. I saw the instinct to flee, to bury his head in the sand, to run away from the monster rather than slay it. If I let him come with me now, he would just be running away again. He would be the victim. I needed him to be a survivor. I gently pulled my hand away, placing it on his chest, I could feel his heart hammering against his ribs. "No, Julian," I said, my voice steady, stripped of the trembling vulnerability I had feigned at the dinner table. "You cannot come with me tonight." "What? Why?" He looked stricken. "You cannot possibly expect me to go back in there and sit with him after what he called you." "I expect you to go back in there and watch," I said, my eyes locking onto him. "I want you to sit there, Julian, and I want you to really look at him. Do not look at him as your father. Look at him as a man. Listen to what he says when he thinks there are no consequences. Witness the ugly, unfiltered truth of who Harrison Sterling actually is. Veronica, I will see you soon," I promised. Leaning up to kiss his cheek, it was a cold kiss, a promise of war rather than affection. "Trust me, go back inside. The show is not over yet." I did not wait for his response. I slid into the driver's seat of my sedan and locked the doors. Through the window, I saw him standing there, torn between the woman he loved and the house that haunted him, slowly, painfully. He turned and walked back toward the light. Good. He needed to see the rot from the inside. I started the engine, and as I navigated the winding driveway, leaving the colossal ego of Sterling Manor in my rearview mirror, the transformation began. My posture shifted. The slump of the deferential shopkeeper vanished, replaced by the rigid, predatory spine of an apex executive. I was no longer Veronica the girlfriend. I was Veronica Lancaster, the ghost in the machine. As soon as the manor gates disappeared around the bend, I reached under the passenger seat and pulled out a slim, matte black briefcase. Inside was not a collection of rare books, but a secure satellite phone and a laptop with encryption protocols that rivaled the Pentagon. I dialed a number that was saved in my contacts simply as E. It rang once. "Lancaster," the voice on the other end answered. Crisp, professional, no pleasantries. It was Elena, my chief of operations, a woman who slept 4 hours a night and considered inefficiency a cardinal sin. "I need a full diagnostic on Sterling Heavy Industries," I said, my voice dropping an octave, losing the soft, Midwestern lilt I used for my cover and regaining its natural, clipped cadence. "Right now, use the Aurora database." There was the sound of rapid typing on the other end. "I have been monitoring the chatter since you arrived at the Hampton estate. I assumed this call was coming. Pulling the file now." I drove with one hand, steering the sedan onto the highway that led back to Manhattan. The road was empty, a ribbon of asphalt stretching out into the darkness. "Talk to me. Elena, what is the exposure?" "It is ugly, Veronica," Elena reported, her voice devoid of emotion. "On the surface, Sterling looks like a titan. Under the hood, it is a salvage job. Harrison has leveraged the company to the hilt. He is carrying $3 billion in debt across 4 different lending institutions. The interest payments alone are eating up 80% of his operating cash flow." $3 billion, I repeated, tasting the number. It was a staggering amount of incompetence. "How is he still floating?" "Smoke and mirrors," Elena said. "And the port contracts, that is his lifeline. He has an exclusive access agreement with the Eastern Seaboard Authority for ports 4 and 7. Those are deep-water terminals. Without them, his fleet cannot dock the super freighters. He is moving 90% of his cargo through those 2 points." I smiled in the darkness. The irony was delicious. The Eastern Seaboard Authority did not own those ports. They managed them. The owner, the entity that held the deed to the land, and the proprietary smart grid technology that ran the automated cranes, was a holding company called Blue Horizon. And Blue Horizon was a wholly owned subsidiary of Aurora Holdings. "When is the renewal up?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "Monday morning," Elena replied. "The 14th. If he does not get the signature on the lease extension by noon on Monday, he is in breach of contract with his shipping clients. The penalties for late delivery would trigger a default on the bank loans within 48 hours. He is waiting for Monday," I murmured. "He thinks it is a rubber stamp. He thinks he is just signing paperwork with some faceless bureaucrats." He has already issued a press release anticipating the renewal to bolster the stock price, Elena added. He is betting the house on it. Elena, I said, my voice hardening into steel. Freeze it. Silence on the line. Then, freeze the negotiations. Kill them, I commanded. Send a notification to the Sterling legal team at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. Tell them that Blue Horizon know. Tell them that the parent company, Aurora Holdings, has intervened. Tell them we are conducting a comprehensive review of Sterling Heavy Industries' solvency and operational competence, indefinitely. That will cause a panic, Elena noted, not as a warning, but as a confirmation. The rumors will hit Wall Street before the market opens. His stock will tank. That is the point, I said. And Elena leak it to the banking sector. Let his creditors know that Aurora is sniffing around his books. If they think a predator is circling, they will panic and call in his loans. I want him surrounded. Understood. Protocol initiated. Anything else? Get the jet ready. I might need to fly to Zurich next week to move some capital. But for now, I am going to the penthouse. I am done playing the antique dealer. Welcome back, boss, Elena said, and the line went dead. I tossed the phone onto the passenger seat and pressed down on the accelerator. The sedan surged forward, back at the manor. The dinner would be continuing. I did not need to be there to see it. I knew Harrison Sterling better than he knew himself. He would be emboldened by my departure. He would see it as a victory, a purging of the weak. He was likely pouring another glass of that scotch he could not actually afford. Turning to his guests to make a joke about how easy it was to take out the trash. And Julian. My chest tightened. I could imagine Julian sitting there, the empty chair beside him screaming of his failure to protect me. Harrison would not let it rest. He would pick at the wound. He would call Julian soft. He would mock the little book girl and her cheap shoes. He would push and push, because that was what bullies did when they felt safe. A notification chimed on my dashboard screen. A text message. Sender Julian. Message, I walked out. I could not listen to him anymore. I am staying at a hotel in the city tonight. I am sorry. I am so sorry. I let out a breath I did not know I was holding. He had done it. He had left the table. It was a small step, but it was the first crack in the foundation of his loyalty to his father. He was disgusted, and fear was turning into resentment. Perfect. I entered the city limits of Manhattan just as the skyline began to glitter like a jewelry box. This was my kingdom. While Harrison played lord of the manor in his decaying seaside estate, I ruled the invisible currents of data and capital that made this city breathe. I drove past the modest apartment building where Veronica the bookseller supposedly lived, a studio apartment I rented solely to maintain my cover, and continued toward the financial district. I pulled the sedan into the underground parking structure of the Millennium Tower. I parked in a reserved spot tucked away in a private bay. Shielded from the security cameras, I stepped out, leaving the girl from Ohio in the driver's seat. I took the private elevator, bypassing the lobby, the keypad recognizing my biometric print instantly. The doors slid shut, and the lift rocketed upward. 70 stories in seconds. When the doors opened, I stepped into the penthouse. It was a sanctuary of glass and steel, a stark contrast to the cluttered, dusty warmth of my fake bookstore. The air here was filtered, cool, and smelled of white tea. The entire south wall was a floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the harbor, the very harbor where Harrison Sterling's ships were currently docked. Oblivious to the fact that the water was about to be drained from under them, I kicked off my heels, leaving them on the marble floor. I walked to the wet bar and poured myself a glass of sparkling water. No alcohol. I needed a razor-sharp mind. I moved to the dressing room. The simple black dress was unzipped and discarded. I stripped away the unassuming undergarments, the minimal makeup, the soft hairstyle. I walked into the shower, turning the water to freezing cold. I stood under the spray for 2 minutes, washing away the scent of Sterling Manor, washing away the feeling of Harrison's gaze on me. When I stepped out, I did not reach for a bathrobe. I walked to the wardrobe that spanned the length of the room. I pulled out a silk power suit in a deep, midnight blue the color of a bruise. the color of the deep ocean. I put on a pair of diamond studs, real ones, each worth more than Harrison's car. I pulled my red hair back into a tight, severe bun. I walked back out to the living area and stood before the massive window. Below me, the city was a grid of lights, a circuit board of power and ambition. Somewhere down there, in the dark waters of the port, Sterling's containers were sitting, waiting for a permission that would never come. I picked up a tablet from the coffee table and synced it to the main server. The financial map of Sterling Heavy Industries appeared on the screen, a web of red lines and precarious leverage. "You called me trash. Harrison," I whispered to the empty room, my reflection in the glass looking back at me cold, terrifying, and utterly in control. "You said I did not belong at your table. You were right. I do not sit at tables. I buy the restaurant." I tapped the screen, highlighting the debt maturity dates. The hunt had officially begun. The prey was fat, slow, and completely unaware that the predator was already inside the house. I swiped my finger across the screen, bringing up the file for Monday's board meeting at Aurora. "Let us see how much you are worth when the sun comes up," I said. The silence of the penthouse was not empty. It was heavy with anticipation. It was the deep, pressurized silence of the ocean floor before a tsunami. Monday was coming, and hell was coming with it. Monday morning broke over Manhattan with a deceptive calm. From the 92nd floor of the Aurora Holdings Tower, the city looked like a circuit board humming with infinite potential. I stood before the wall of glass in my private office, a space that was the antithesis of the cramped, dusty bookstore I had pretended to manage for 3 years. Here, everything was white marble, brushed steel, and terrifyingly silent. I was dressed in a tailored cream suit that cost more than the sedan I drove to the Hamptons. My hair was loose, cascading over my shoulders, no longer bound by the messy bun of a frantic shopkeeper. In my hand, I held a tablet, my eyes fixed on the opening bell of the New York Stock Exchange. At exactly 9:30 in the morning, the market opened. I watched the ticker symbol for Sterling Heavy Industries, SHI. It opened at $42.10. Within the first 90 seconds, it slipped to $41.80. It was not a crash, it was a stumble. It was the financial equivalent of a heartbeat skipping a rhythm, a small, barely noticeable anomaly that only a predator would notice. But I knew exactly what was causing it. Across town, in the mahogany-paneled executive suite of the Sterling building, I knew the phone was ringing. At that very moment, Harrison Sterling was likely leaning back in his leather chair, nursing a coffee, waiting for his chief operating officer to bring him the signed renewal contracts for the port leases. He would be expecting a rubber stamp. He would be expecting business as usual. Instead, he was about to receive a declaration of war. I tapped the screen, switching the view to a live feed from Port 4. It was a massive industrial sprawl of cranes and containers. Through the camera lens, I could see 2 of Sterling's massive superpost Panamax vessels idling in the harbor, waiting for docking clearance. They were floating cities of steel, carrying millions of dollars in electronics and automotive parts, and they were not moving. My intercom buzzed. It was Elena. "The notification has been delivered." Elena's voice was crisp. "We sent it via courier and secure email to their legal department at 8:45. Receipt confirmed." "Reaction?" I asked, my eyes never leaving the ship on the screen. "Panic," she replied. "Their VP of Logistics just called the Port Authority screaming. He was told that access to Terminals 4 and 7 has been suspended pending a compliance review by the parent company. He demanded to speak to the port director. The director told him it was out of his hands and directed him to Aurora Corporate." "Let him scream," I said calmly. "What is the burn rate?" "With 2 ships idling and the third due to arrive at noon, the demurrage charges are racking up at roughly $15,000 per hour. That does not include the late delivery penalties from his clients. If those containers do not touch the dock by tomorrow morning, he misses the just-in-time delivery window for an automotive manufacturer in Detroit. That contract alone is worth $12 million a year." Good, I said. Keep the line closed. If Harrison calls, he goes to voicemail. If he tries to circumvent us and call the port directly, remind the port manager who signs his paycheck. I could visualize the scene in Harrison's office perfectly. The air conditioning would be set to a frigid 68 degrees, but he would be sweating. Harrison Sterling was a man who believed the world operated on handshake deals and the intimidating weight of his last name. He did not understand the granular, brutal mechanics of modern logistics. He thought owning the ships was the power. He did not realize that a ship without a port is just a floating prison. He would be slamming his fist on his desk right now. He would be barking at his secretary, demanding to get the CEO of Aurora Holdings on the line. He had never met the CEO, in his mind. The head of Aurora was likely some gray-haired technocrat from Silicon Valley, someone he could bully or bribe. He had no idea he was dialing the number of the woman he had called trash less than 48 hours ago. "Elena," I said, shifting my attention back to the stock chart. The price had dipped another 30 cents. The algorithm was starting to sniff out the inefficiency. "It is time to feed the sharks. The market sees the delay, but they do not know the cause. Let us give them a narrative." "What is the story?" Elena asked. "Leak it to the secondary bond markets first," I instructed, tracing the downward trend line with my finger. "Tell them a mysterious investor is sniffing around Sterling's debt obligations. Frame it as a distress signal. Suggest that the liquidity crunch is worse than reported, and that someone is looking to buy up their bad loans for pennies on the dollar to force a restructuring. That will tank the stock," Elena warned, though I could hear the smile in her voice. If the equity holders think the debt holders are about to take control, they will dump their shares to salvage whatever value is left. "Exactly," I said cold. "I want the price under $30 by Wednesday. Make the call." I cut the connection and walked to the window. The city below was oblivious. Taxis were yellow ants crawling through the concrete canyons. But in the invisible world of high-frequency trading, I had just spilled blood in the water. While I orchestrated the demolition of an empire from the sky, down on the street level, a different kind of heartbreak was unfolding. Julian. I checked the time. It was 10:15 in the morning. Julian usually stopped by the bookstore on Mondays before heading to his architectural firm. He would bring me a coffee oat milk latte, extra foam, and we would steal 10 minutes of quiet before our realities crashed back in. I pulled up the security feed from the bookstore. I had kept the cameras active, even though the lease was officially terminated as of this morning. On the grainy black and white screen, I saw him. Julian stood on the sidewalk, holding 2 paper cups. He was wearing his gray overcoat, the collar turned up against the wind. He looked tired. There were dark circles under his eyes, evidence of a sleepless night spent in a hotel room, wrestling with the guilt of his father's sins. He reached for the door handle. It was locked. He frowned, jiggling the handle. He stepped back and looked at the display window. The rare first editions of Dickens and Hemingway were gone. The shelves were bare, stripped clean by a moving crew I had dispatched at 3 in the morning. And then he saw it. The small, white sign taped to the glass. Permanently closed. Relocated. There was no forwarding address. No phone number. Just the finality of the text. I watched as Julian dropped his hand. He stood there for a long time, the bustling pedestrian traffic of New York flowing around him like water around a stone. He looked at the coffee cups in his hand, useless now and then, back at the empty shop. He pulled out his phone and dialed my number, my personal cell phone. The one with the cracked screen that sat in my purse began to buzz on my marble desk. I stared at it. The screen lit up with his name and a picture of us from a summer picnic in Central Park. In the photo, I was laughing, my head thrown back, looking like a carefree girl with nothing to hide. I did not answer. I could not answer. Not yet. If I spoke to him now, I would break. I would tell him everything, and he would try to stop me. He would try to broker a peace, to save his father from the guillotine. He was too good, too gentle. He did not understand that for something new to be built, the old structure had to be razed to the ground. I watched on the monitor as the call went to voicemail. Julian lowered the phone. He placed the second coffee cup on the doorstep of the empty shop. A silent offering to a ghost. Then, he turned and walked away. His shoulders slumped under the weight of a world that was rapidly confusing him. I turned the monitor off. The black screen reflected my face. I looked hard. Unyielding. "Forgive me, Julian," I whispered. "But you need to see him fall." Meanwhile, at Sterling Heavy Industries, the confusion was curdling into panic. Harrison Sterling was pacing the length of his office. His face was a mottled red, clashing with the expensive silk of his tie. "What do you mean you cannot get through?" he roared at his secretary, a terrified young woman who was trembling behind her desk. "I am sorry, Mr. Sterling," she stammered. "I have tried the main line, the executive line, and even the emergency contact. The system just says our call is being routed to legal compliance. No one is picking up." "Legal compliance," Harrison shouted. "I have been doing business with Aurora for 5 years. We are their biggest client in the sector. Get me the port authority on the phone. Get me the mayor. I have ships sitting in the water, burning fuel, and I have union leaders calling me about overtime because the crews are stuck on board." His chief financial officer, a man named Marcus, who had been cooking the books for Harrison for a decade, hurried into the room. He was sweating profusely, clutching a tablet. "Harrison, we have a problem," Marcus said, his voice tight. "I know we have a problem. Marcus, the damn gates are locked." "No, it is the market," Marcus said, thrusting the tablet toward him. "Look at the ticker. The stock is down 4% since the open, and the volume is huge. Someone is dumping blocks of shares." Harrison squinted at the screen. "Market fluctuations. It is just noise. It will bounce back when we announce the renewal." "There are rumors." "Harrison," Marcus whispered, looking at the open door as if fear itself was listening. "My contacts at the bank say there is talk of a distress buyer. Someone is asking about the covenants on our revolving credit facility. They are asking if we are in technical default." "Default," Harrison laughed, but it was a hollow, brittle sound. "Do not be ridiculous. We have never missed a payment. We are Sterling Industries. We are the backbone of American trade. We are cash poor." "Harrison," Marcus reminded him, his voice dropping to a hiss. "We have $6 million in operating cash. The rest is tied up in inventory. Inventory that is currently sitting on ships that cannot dock, if those ships do not unload by Wednesday. We cannot invoice the clients. If we cannot invoice, we cannot pay the bond coupon due on Friday." Harrison stopped pacing. The reality of the timeline hit him. Friday. He had 5 days. "It is a glitch," Harrison insisted. Though his hands were shaking slightly as he reached for a cigar, he was not allowed to smoke in the building. "It is some computer error at Aurora. I will go down there myself if I have to. I will knock on the door. Do they think they can strong-arm me? I am Harrison Sterling." He lit the cigar, the flame illuminating the deepening lines of age and stress on his face. "Get the lawyers," Harrison commanded, exhaling a cloud of blue smoke. "Draft a lawsuit, breach of contract, tortious interference, sue them for every penny of the demurrage. I want to bury this Aurora company in so much paperwork they will beg to open the gates." He did not know that the lawyers he was about to call were already reading the fine print of the contract he had signed 5 years ago. A contract I had personally revised when Aurora acquired the port management firm. Clause 18, Section B. The provider reserves the right to suspend access immediately and without notice upon suspicion of financial insolvency or reputational risk. He had given me the weapon years ago. I had just pulled the trigger. Back in my office, the afternoon sun was casting long shadows across the floor. The stock had closed the day at $38, a 10% drop in a single session. The bleeding had started. I sat at my desk, the cityscape glowing behind me. I opened the file on my computer labeled Phase 2. The phone rang again. This time, it was not Julian. It was the direct line from the reception desk downstairs. "Ms. Lancaster, the receptionist said, there is a Mr. Julian Sterling here to see you. He says he does not have an appointment, but it is urgent. He says he is looking for Well. He seems confused. He asked for the owner of the building. I paused. Julian was smart. He had gone to the Hall of Records or pulled the property deed for the bookstore. He had found out that the building the bookstore was in was owned by a shell company, and that shell company traced back to this address. He was following the breadcrumbs. Tell him the owner is unavailable, I said, my voice devoid of sentiment. Tell him that if he has a grievance regarding a tenant, he can file a written complaint with the legal department. Yes, ma'am. He looks quite distressed. He will survive, I said, and hung up. I looked down at the street. I could almost feel his presence 40 floors below, standing in the lobby of my fortress, looking for the woman he loved in a directory of cold corporate names. He was close. But he was not ready to know the truth, not until his father was nothing more than a cautionary tale. I turned back to the screen. The red line of the Sterling stock chart was the only art I cared about tonight. Sleep well, Harrison, I murmured. Tomorrow, we take away your credit cards. Wednesday brought a suffocating gray sky to New York City. Mirroring the atmosphere inside the executive suite of Sterling Heavy Industries, I was not there physically. Of course, I was sitting in my climate-controlled sanctuary on the 92nd floor of the Aurora Tower. However, thanks to a high-fidelity audio bug, planted in the frame of the portrait of Harrison's grandfather, a little parting gift from my security team during a gala 6 months ago, I was present for every desperate breath Harrison took. I sat at my desk, a cup of jasmine tea cooling untouched beside me, listening to the feed. You will go to that lunch, Julian, and you will be charming. Harrison's voice came through the speaker, distorted slightly by static but dripping with panic. Clarissa Vanderbilt has been asking about you for months. Her father sits on the board of the First National Trust. If you can secure a dinner date with her, just one date, I can leverage that connection to get an extension on the credit line. I closed my eyes. It was classic Harrison. When the business fails, sell the children. I am not a poker chip, Dad. Julian's voice was quieter, weary. I am not going to court a woman I do not know just because you overextended yourself on shipping lanes we did not need. You will do what is necessary to save this family, Harrison roared. The sound of a fist hitting a desk echoed. Do you think I built this for myself? I did it for you. And now, when the walls are closing in, you want to play the moralist. You are willing to let it all burn because you are too proud to have lunch. I am willing to let it burn because it is already ash. Dad, Julian shot back, I saw the reports. I saw the debt structuring. You have been insolvent for 2 years. You have been paying off loans with other loans. It is a Ponzi scheme with a shipping logo. How dare you, Harrison hissed. You ungrateful little parasite. You are just like your mother. Soft, weak. She never had the stomach for what it takes to be great either. She spent her life apologizing for our success, just like you are doing now. It is a good thing she died when she did, or she would have seen her son turn into a failure. The air in my office seemed to drop 10 degrees. I opened my eyes. That was the line. Harrison had crossed the Rubicon. Julian worshipped the memory of his mother. There was a long silence on the audio feed. Then, the sound of a chair scraping against the floor. I quit, Julian said. His voice was no longer weary. It was ice. You cannot quit, Harrison scoffed. You are a Sterling. Not anymore, Julian replied. I am resigning from the board effective immediately. I am relinquishing my trust. Keep the money, keep the house, keep the legacy. I am done. If you walk out that door, Julian, I will cut you off, Harrison screamed, his voice cracking. You will be on the street. You will be begging me for a job within a month. You think that little book girl of yours can support you? She is gone. Even she smelled the stench of failure and ran. Do not speak about her, Julian warned, his tone low and dangerous. And for the record, she did not run. She has more integrity in her little finger than you have in your entire board of directors." A door slammed. The feed went silent except for the heavy, ragged breathing of an old man left alone in a room full of ghosts. I reached out and severed the connection. I stood up and walked to the window. My heart was racing, not with adrenaline, but with a fierce, protective ache. He had done it. He had finally cut the cord. But now he was free-falling, and I needed to be the net. I knew he was coming. I had left the breadcrumb carefully. When I closed the bookstore, I had arranged for a single, automated email to be sent to his personal account regarding a rare edition of The Great Gatsby he had ordered weeks ago. The email stated that the order could not be fulfilled at the shop, but could be picked up at the parent company's holding office. The address listed was not a warehouse. It was One Aurora Plaza, Suite 9200. It was a risk. If he came here, the illusion would shatter. The cozy, safe world of Veronica the bookseller would be obliterated, replaced by the terrifying reality of Veronica the Titan. But after what I just heard, he deserved the truth. He deserved to know that the power that was crushing his father was not a random act of God. It was an act of love. 40 minutes later, my intercom buzzed. "Ms. Lancaster," my assistant's voice was hesitant. "Mr. Julian Sterling is here. He is demanding to see the manager of the book distribution center. He seems to think there is a mistake. He is holding a printout of an email." "Send him up," I said. "Directly to my office. Clear the floor." "Yes, ma'am." I waited. I did not sit behind my desk. That would be too much of a power play. Instead, I stood in the center of the room, my hands clasped in front of me, waiting for the elevator doors to open. The minutes stretched out. I could imagine his ascent, the high-speed elevator, the ears popping, the realization that he was going higher and higher, far past the floors where a simple book distributor would operate. The heavy steel doors slid open with a soft hiss. Julian stepped out. He looked wrecked. His tie was loosened, his hair was windblown, and his eyes were wild with confusion. He was clutching a crumpled piece of paper. He took 2 steps into the room and stopped dead. He looked at the expansive, minimalist office. He looked at the panoramic view of Manhattan that only a billionaire could afford. He looked at the abstract art on the walls, the security team standing discreetly by the far exit, and finally, he looked at me. I was not wearing the cardigan and jeans he was used to. I was in a sharp, slate-gray power suit, wearing 4-inch stilettos that made me almost his height. My expression was guarded. Waiting. "Veronica," he whispered. The word sounded foreign in the room. He looked down at the paper in his hand, then back at me, then at the brass plaque on my desk that read Veronica Lancaster, CEO. "I do not understand," he stammered, walking slowly toward me as if navigating a minefield. "The email, the address asking for the parent company is Aurora Holdings." "Yes," I said softly, "but you—" He gestured vaguely at the room. "You run a bookstore. You drive a Honda. You—" He stopped, his brain struggling to reconcile the 2 images. "Aurora Holdings, the company that is blocking the port renewal, the company that is buying up my father's debt." He stared at me, his eyes widening as the pieces clicked into place. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He staggered back a step. "It is you," he breathed. "It has been you the whole time. The investor, the predator. It is you." "Yes," I repeated. I expected anger. I expected him to scream that I had lied to him, that I had played him, that I was no better than his father. I braced myself for his rage. But Julian Sterling was not his father. He looked around the room again, his shoulders sinking. The tension that had been holding him upright since he stormed out of his father's office seemed to evaporate, leaving him looking incredibly small against the backdrop of my empire. "You are a billionaire," he said, his voice flat with shock. "All those times we sat in the park eating $3 hot dogs, all those times I worried about you making rent. You could have bought the entire park. I did not care about the money. Julian, I said, taking a step toward him, I cared about being with you. The bookstore was real to me because it was where we were just us. No legacies, no expectations. Why? He asked, his voice cracking. He looked at me with a vulnerability that broke my heart. Why destroy him? Why go to these lengths? Was it just because of what he said at dinner, because he called you trash? It started that way, I admitted. When he looked at me with that sneer, when he dismissed my existence, I wanted to show him exactly what trash could do. I wanted to teach him that dignity is not a commodity you can hoard. I closed the distance between us. Reaching out to take his hands, they were cold. He did not pull away. But then, I continued, looking deep into his brown eyes, I saw what he was doing to you. I saw him using you as a shield. I heard him today. Julian, I heard him tell you to sell yourself for a credit extension. I heard him insult your mother. Julian flinched. You heard that? I have ears everywhere, I said. Julian, that man is a cancer. He has not just destroyed a company, he has spent 30 years trying to destroy your spirit. He calls you weak because you have a conscience. He calls you soft because you have a soul. As long as he has power, he will use it to suffocate you. He will drag you down with his sinking ship just so he does not have to drown alone. I squeezed his hands. I am not doing this to get rich. I have more money than God. I am doing this to cut the anchor chain. I am burning his kingdom down so you can finally walk out of the ashes and build something that is actually yours. Julian stared at me. He looked at the fierce determination in my eyes. He looked at the woman who had pretended to be nobody, just to be loved for who she was, and who was now using the power of a titan to fight a battle he had been too afraid to fight himself. He pulled his hands from mine and walked to the window. He looked down at the city. Somewhere down there, Harrison Sterling was sitting in his office, alone, waiting for a son who was never coming back. He told me I was just like my mother, Julian said quietly, his back to me. He meant it as an insult. But my mother was the only person who ever showed me kindness in that house. She hated the business. She hated what it turned him into. He turned around. His face was pale, but his eyes were clear. The fear was gone. He has to be stopped, Julian said. It was not a question. It was a verdict. He will be, I promised. By Friday, Sterling Heavy Industries will cease to exist in its current form. I am going to strip him of his title, his assets, and his pride. I am going to leave him with nothing but his name, and even that will be worthless. Julian nodded slowly. A profound sadness washed over his face, but it was the sadness of mourning a death that had already happened long ago. He has been dead to me for years, Julian whispered. I was just waiting for the funeral. He looked at me, really looked at me, seeing the CEO and the bookseller as one complex, terrifying, magnificent person. Do not let him hurt anyone else. Veronica, Julian said, his voice steady. Do you hear me? Do not let him take down the pension funds. Do not let him ruin the employees. Bury him, but save the people. That is already part of the plan, I assured him. I am buying the debt, but I am also capitalizing the pension accounts. The only casualty will be Harrison. Julian let out a long, shuddering breath. He walked back to me and wrapped his arms around my waist, burying his face in the crook of my neck. He held on tight, like a sailor clinging to a mast in a hurricane. I am not going to call him, Julian mumbled into my suit jacket. I am not going to warn him. I am staying here. I am staying with you. I rested my chin on his head, my hand stroking his hair. I looked out over the skyline of New York. The sun was setting, casting a blood-red glow over the Hudson River. Good, I whispered, because the real storm is about to hit, and I want you in the eye of it. Right here beside me. Julian had made his choice. He had chosen the future over the past. He had chosen the truth over the lie, and in doing so, he had given me the final permission I needed. I looked at the phone on my desk. It was time to initiate the final phase. It was time to let the trap snap shut. The deadline arrived on Thursday morning with the subtlety of an executioner's axe. From my command center at Aurora, I monitored the communications going into Sterling Heavy Industries. The sharks were not just circling anymore, they were taking bites. At 9 o'clock sharp, the lead underwriter from First National Trust called Harrison. I listened to the recording 5 minutes later. The banker's voice was polite, the kind of professional courtesy that masks absolute ruthlessness. He gave Harrison 48 hours, by Saturday morning. Sterling Heavy Industries had to either produce $300 million in immediate liquidity to service the interest on their loans, or the bank would file for involuntary bankruptcy and seize the assets. Harrison was a cornered animal. I could hear it in his voice, the shrill, frantic tone of a man who had spent his life believing rules were for other people. He tried to bargain. He tried to threaten. He dropped names of senators who had been dead for 10 years. The banker simply repeated the deadline and hung up. The trap was set. It was time to introduce the bait. Deploy V Ventures, I told Elena. V Ventures was a shell company I had incorporated 3 years ago in the Cayman Islands. To the outside world, it was a boutique private equity firm specializing in distressed assets, known for high-risk, high-reward plays in the industrial sector. To me, it was a puppet, and I was holding the strings. At 10:30, my proxy, a sharp-tongued lawyer named Silas, who played the part of a ruthless venture capitalist, perfectly made the call to Harrison's office. "Mr. Sterling," Silas said, his voice smooth as oil. "My name is Silas Thorne, representing V Ventures. We have been watching the market activity surrounding your company. We believe the market has overreacted. We see value in the Sterling name." I watched Harrison on the hidden camera feed. He practically slumped with relief. He did not ask who V Ventures was backed by. He did not ask for a portfolio of their previous investments. He did not run a background check on Silas Thorne. He heard value and Sterling in the same sentence, and his ego filled in the rest. He saw a lifeline. "We are willing to offer a capital injection." Silas continued. $500 million. Immediate transfer. Enough to silence the banks and clear the demurrage at the ports. $500 million, Harrison repeated, licking his lips. "That is acceptable. What are the terms?" "Standard distress terms," Silas said. "We require a restructuring of the board. We want a controlling interest in the voting shares 51% until the loan is repaid plus interest, and we need an emergency shareholder meeting called for tomorrow morning to ratify the agreement." Harrison hesitated. Even in his desperation, giving up 51% was a pill hard to swallow. 51% is steep. That is my company. It is a temporary measure, Mr. Sterling. Silas lied effortlessly. "We are investors, not operators. We have no interest in running a shipping company. We just need the voting power to ensure our capital is protected during the restructuring. Once the stock rebounds, and we are confident it will, you can buy back the equity. You stay on as chairman. You keep the office. You keep the title." Harrison smiled. It was a grotesque expression. He thought he saw the game. He thought V Ventures was just a bag of money he could use and then discard. He figured he could sign the deal, take the cash, pay off the banks, and then use his political connections to bury V Ventures in litigation when they tried to exercise their voting rights later. He thought he was the shark. "Fine," Harrison said, regaining his bluster. "Draw up the papers, but I want it done by tonight, and I want a press release stating that Sterling has secured a strategic partnership." "We will send the courier," Silas said. In my office, I leaned back in my chair. He took it. Julian was sitting on the leather sofa across the room. He had been quiet all morning, reading through piles of financial records that Elena had procured from the internal servers of Sterling Heavy Industries. He looked up, his face pale. "He did not even negotiate," Julian said, shaking his head. 51%. He just handed you the company." "He thinks he can outsmart a contract," I replied. "He does not realize that the contract I drafted is ironclad. There is no buyback clause. Julian, there is no temporary provision. Once I have that 51%, I own him. The restructuring I promised, that is code for liquidation of management. Julian looked down at the documents in his lap. He picked up a blue folder, his fingers gripping the edge tightly. If you are going to take him down, Julian said, his voice steady but heavy with emotion. You need this. He stood up and walked over to my desk, placing the folder in front of me. What is this? I asked. I found it in the encrypted archives last night, Julian explained. I knew my father was bad with money, but I thought it was just incompetence. This is criminal. I opened the folder. It was a ledger of fund transfers dating back 4 years. I ran my eyes down the columns, and my blood ran cold. Employee pension fund, $400,000 withdrawn. Widows and orphans, benefit trust, $250,000 withdrawn. Maintenance and safety reserve, $1.2 million withdrawn. I looked up at Julian. He raided the pension fund. He used the employees' retirement money to cover his margin calls, Julian said, his voice trembling with suppressed rage. There are 3,000 workers at the docks, crane operators, loaders, administrative staff, who think their future is secure. It is gone. He stole it all to pay for the yacht, the parties, the image. Julian took a deep breath. I cannot protect him from this. Veronica, I do not want to. Stealing from the bank is one thing. Banks have insurance. Stealing from the people who built his company is evil. I reached out and covered his hand with mine. This was the final nail. Until now, this had been a personal vendetta, a war against a man who insulted me. But this made it a moral imperative. Harrison Sterling was not just a snob. He was a thief who was robbing the elderly to buy silk ties. This is the ammunition we needed, I said. We will not just fire him, Julian. We are going to destroy his reputation. When we walk into that boardroom tomorrow, we are not just taking his chair. We are taking his legacy. Do it, Julian said. Burn it down. By Thursday afternoon, the news had leaked. The financial networks were buzzing with the headline, Sterling Empire on the brink, mystery investor rumored to step in. Surveillance showed Harrison in high spirits. He was walking around the office, clapping employees on the back, the same employees he had robbed blind, telling them that big things were coming. He was drinking champagne in his office at 2 p.m, celebrating his genius. He had survived again. He had found another sucker to bail him out. I signed the final page of the merger agreement on my end. The document was a masterpiece of legal entrapment. Clause 42 stated that any evidence of financial malfeasance by existing management would result in immediate termination for cause, stripping the executive of all severance packages and stock options. With Julian's evidence, I had him dead to rights. Elena, I called out, is the package ready? Just arrived at the lobby of the Sterling building, Elena confirmed. I checked the monitor. A delivery courier was walking into Harrison's outer office. He was carrying a massive, ostentatious arrangement of white orchids and lilies flowers that looked beautiful, but smelled faintly of a funeral parlor. The secretary brought them in. Harrison looked surprised, then delighted. He reached for the card tucked into the foliage. I knew exactly what it said. I had handwritten it myself in elegant, sweeping calligraphy. To a new partnership. See you soon. There was no signature. Harrison laughed, tossing the card onto his desk. Classy, he muttered to his CFO. See this V Ventures group. They know who they are dealing with. They are paying tribute. They know I'm still the king. He had no idea that the new partnership was a hostile acquisition, and see you soon was a literal threat. He thought he was getting a silent partner. He was getting an executioner. He thinks he has won, Julian said, standing beside me, watching his father preen on the screen. Let him enjoy tonight, I said, my voice cold. It is his last night as a free man. Tomorrow, reality hits him like a freight train. I turned to Julian. Are you ready for tomorrow? You do not have to be in the room. I do, Julian replied. He looked at the screen, at the man who had called him weak, the man who had stolen from the innocent. I need to look him in the eye when he realizes that the trash he threw away has come back to recycle him. I nodded. I picked up my phone and dialed the legal team. "The trap is primed," I said. "File the motion for the emergency shareholder meeting. 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. Location Sterling Heavy Industries headquarters, main boardroom, and make sure the press is alerted. I want cameras in the lobby." "Understood. Ms. Lancaster." I walked to the window of my office, looking out at the city that was about to witness a public execution. The sun was setting, casting long shadows that looked like bars across the skyline. Harrison Sterling had spent 60 years building a monument to himself. It would take me exactly 60 minutes to tear it down. "Get some rest, Julian," I said softly. "Tomorrow, we go hunting." Friday morning arrived not with the gentle light of dawn, but with the cacophony of a kingdom collapsing under its own weight. The timeline I had orchestrated was precise, but the sheer velocity of the destruction exceeded even my simulations. It was a domino effect of catastrophic proportions, and I was watching every tile fall from the monitors in my war room. At 7 o'clock in the morning, the silence of the Sterling executive wing was shattered. I had timed the release of the insolvency rumors to hit the Asian markets just before they closed, which meant by the time New York woke up. The global banking sector was already in a state of high alert. The first domino was the First National Trust. My inside source confirmed that at 7:15, they formally froze Sterling's revolving credit facility. The lifeline was cut. Then came the suppliers, the fuel companies, the maintenance contractors, the insurance underwriters, all of them. Spooked by the whispers I had planted and the sudden freeze from the bank, began calling simultaneously. I listened to the audio feed from Harrison's office. It sounded like a frantic call center. "What do you mean, payment on delivery?" Harrison was screaming into his receiver. "We have had a net 30 account with you for 20 years. You cannot just change the terms because of some market gossip." He slammed the phone down, only for it to ring again instantly. "Yes, who is this?" "The fuel depot." "Look, the check is being processed. It is a computer error. Do not stop the refueling if those trucks do not move. I will sue you for hello." "Hello." He was sweating. I could hear the desperate rasp in his breathing. He was running from one fire to another, trying to put them out with a bucket that had a hole in the bottom. Then came the social isolation. The part I had crafted with particular cruelty. Harrison Sterling believed his net worth was his social safety net. He believed the men he drank scotch with, the men who laughed at his jokes about the poor, were his brothers in arms. He was about to learn that in the high-stakes world of capital, there are no brothers, only potential liabilities. "Get me Jonathan at the venture firm," Harrison barked at his secretary, "and try the senator again, and call the Vanderbilt estate. Tell them it is an emergency." I watched the call logs. Jonathan sent to voicemail, the senator unavailable, the Vanderbilt estate. The line was busy. "They are not picking up. Mr. Sterling," his secretary sobbed. She was terrified. "Mr. Vanderbilt's assistant said he is out of the country, but I just saw his check-in at the club on social media." "They are dodging me," Harrison whispered, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. "Cowards. Rats leaving the ship." He sat heavily in his chair. The man who had presided over the dinner table like a monarch just 2 nights ago was now a pariah. He had called me trash because I did not have a pedigree. Now, he was discovering that his pedigree was worthless without the liquidity to back it up. But the final blow, the one that truly forced his hand, came from the streets. At 8:30, a low roar began to filter through the triple-paned glass of his office window. It was not traffic. It was the sound of 3,000 angry voices. The rumor about the pension fund theft, the evidence Julian had provided, had spread through the dock workers' union like wildfire. I had made sure of it. A simple anonymous tip to the union rep at 5 in the morning was all it took. "What is that noise?" Harrison asked. Walking to the window, he looked down. The plaza in front of the Sterling building was a sea of picket signs and angry faces. The workers were not just striking, they were rioting. They knew their retirement money had been funneled into Harrison's lifestyle, and they wanted blood. "Thief," they chanted. "Give us our money, lock him up." Harrison recoiled from the window, his face turning the color of old parchment. He was terrified of the mob. To a man like him, the working class was a resource to be exploited. Silent and invisible, when they became loud, when they became a physical force, they became his worst nightmare. "Security!" he shouted. "Lock the lobby doors. Do not let them in. Call the police." "The police are here, sir." His head of security crackled over the intercom. "But they are just holding the line. They are not dispersing the crowd. The union has a permit. Sir, we cannot guarantee your safety if you try to leave the building." He was trapped. His cell phone buzzed. It was Silas Thorne, my proxy from V Ventures. "Mr. Sterling," Silas said calmly, "it sounds like you are having a difficult morning. The offer stands, but we need to sign the deal today. If we do not have control of the board by noon, we withdraw the capital injection. You will face bankruptcy court on Monday and, given the pension situation, likely a federal indictment by Tuesday. Prison." The word hung in the air, unspoken but deafening. Harrison Sterling could handle being broke. He could not handle being a prisoner. He could not handle the jumpsuit, the metal bars, the loss of his identity. "Fine," Harrison croaked, his voice broken. "The meeting is on 10 o'clock, but I have conditions. I stay on as honorary chairman. I keep the office. I keep the car." "We can discuss titles at the meeting," Silas said dismissively. "Just be in the boardroom. And Harrison, make sure you look presentable. The press is going to be there." Harrison hung up. He straightened his tie with trembling hands. He looked at his reflection in the mirror, a king without a kingdom, clinging to the delusion that he could still wear the crown if he just signed the right piece of paper. While Harrison was disintegrating, I was undergoing my own transformation. I stood in the dressing room of my penthouse. The morning sun flooded the space, reflecting off the mirrors. I had already showered and scrubbed my skin until it tingled. Today was not a day for the shadows. Today was a day for blinding light. I reached past the rows of black and navy suits, the uniform of the corporate world, and pulled out the garment bag I had ordered specifically for this moment. I unzipped it. Inside was a suit of pure, stark white. It was a statement. In the business world, you wore dark colors to blend in. To show authority through conformity, white was a risk. White was arrogant. White demanded that everyone look at you. It was the color of a supernova. I slipped into the trousers. They were tailored to perfection, sharp enough to cut glass. I buttoned the vest, the fabric hugging my frame like armor. Finally, I put on the blazer. It had structured shoulders and a cinched waist, creating a silhouette that was feminine but undeniably powerful. I did not wear the soft, natural makeup of the bookstore owner. I applied a bold, blood-red lipstick. I lined my eyes with precision. I pulled my red hair back into a high, sleek ponytail that left my face entirely exposed. There was nowhere to hide. I stepped into my shoes, 6-inch stilettos with red soles. I looked in the mirror. Veronica the bookseller was dead. In her place stood the CEO of Aurora Holdings, the woman who owned the debt, the ports, and in less than an hour, the name Sterling itself. "You look like an angel of death," a voice said from the doorway. I turned. Julian was standing there. He was wearing a new suit I had had a tailor rush deliver for him. It was a deep charcoal, modern and sharp, a stark contrast to the stuffy, old-fashioned cuts his father had forced him to wear. He looked like himself for the first time in years, an architect of the future, not a custodian of the past. "Is that a compliment?" I asked, smoothing my lapel. "It is the most terrifying compliment I have ever given." He smiled, walking over to kiss my forehead. "Are you ready?" "I was born ready," I said. "Are you sure you want to be there? It is going to be brutal." "I am the chief architect of the new Phoenix Logistics," he said, using the name we had chosen for the reborn company. I need to be there to survey the demolition site before we start building. Then let us go, I said. The car is waiting. We took the private elevator down to the garage. My driver was waiting not with the sedan, but with the Aurora flagship vehicle, a massive, black armored limousine that looked like it belonged to a head of state. The drive to the Sterling building was silent. I held Julian's hand. His palm was dry, his grip firm. He was not shaking. He had made his peace with the patricide we were about to commit. As we approached the Sterling headquarters, the crowd of strikers came into view. It was a sea of signs and angry shouting. When they saw the limousine approaching, the crowd surged forward, thinking it was Harrison trying to escape, or another banker coming to steal their scraps. Security guards struggled to hold the line. "Stay back," the guards shouted. The car stopped. The driver opened my door. I stepped out. The sight of the white suit seemed to stun the crowd for a second. I did not cower. I did not rush inside. I stood on the sidewalk, amidst the shouting and the chaos, and I looked at the workers. I caught the eye of a burly man in the front row holding a sign that said, "My kids need to eat." I nodded to him, a slow, deliberate nod of acknowledgement. I was not here to fight them. I was here to deliver the head of the man who had starved them. I turned and walked up the stairs, Julian right beside me. The crowd did not throw anything. They sensed something. They sensed that the Grim Reaper had arrived, and she was not there for them. Inside the building, the atmosphere was funereal. The receptionists were whispering. Junior executives were packing boxes, assuming the company would be shuttered by noon. We bypassed the front desk and took the express elevator to the 50th floor. The boardroom. Inside the massive glass-walled room, the air was stale with recycled oxygen and fear. The long mahogany table was crowded. Lawyers from 3 different firms were shuffling papers. The representatives from the bank sat with their arms crossed, looking at their watches. The few remaining shareholders were whispering furiously to each other. At the head of the table sat Harrison Sterling. He looked smaller than I remembered. He was trying to project power, sitting upright, his chin raised, but the tremors in his hands betrayed him. He was clutching a pen as if it were a life raft. He kept glancing at the door, waiting for the partners from V Ventures to arrive and save him. He looked terrible. His skin was gray, his eyes bloodshot. He had aged 10 years in 2 days. But when he spoke to his personal attorney, his voice still held that insufferable, nasal tone of entitlement. "Make sure the contract stipulates the car service," Harrison was saying, loud enough for the room to hear. "And the club membership. I cannot conduct business without the club. And tell these people to stop staring. It is a merger, for God's sake, not an autopsy." He was delusional to the bitter end. He actually believed he was negotiating. He believed he still had cards to play. The clock on the wall ticked to 10 o'clock. The heavy double doors at the far end of the room remained closed. "Where are they?" Harrison snapped, checking his gold watch. "Unpunctuality is a sign of poor breeding. I should tax them for every minute they are late." "Mr. Sterling," one of the bank representatives said wearily, "you are not in a position to tax anyone if that money is not wired in 10 minutes. We are seizing the building." "They will be here," Harrison shouted, his voice cracking. "They need me. I am the face of this company." I stood on the other side of the doors, listening. Julian stood beside me. "Ready?" I asked him. "Ready," he said. I signaled to the security guard. He nodded and reached for the handles. The doors swung open. The sudden movement silenced the room. 20 heads turned in unison. Harrison looked up, annoyance flashing across his face, expecting a frantic assistant or perhaps Silas Thorne. Instead, he saw a blinding flash of white. I stepped into the room. I did not walk. I glided. The sound of my heels on the parquet floor was a rhythmic, sharp percussion that echoed in the silence. Click, click, click. I walked straight toward the empty chair at the opposite end of the table, the chair reserved for the acquiring party. Harrison squinted. The light from the window was behind me, creating a halo effect that obscured my face for a moment. He saw the silhouette. He saw the power suit. He saw the entourage of serious-looking lawyers trailing behind me. "Who is this?" Harrison demanded, standing up. "Where is Thorne? Who are you?" I stopped at the foot of the table. I let the silence stretch out, letting the tension tighten around his throat like a noose. Then, I stepped out of the glare and into the clear light of the room. Harrison's eyes went wide, his mouth opened, but no sound came out. He blinked, once, twice, as if his brain was refusing to process the visual data. He looked at the red hair. He looked at the familiar features, now hardened into diamond-sharp angles. He looked at the woman he had dismissed as a peasant, now standing before him draped in the fabric of a conqueror. "You," he whispered, "the book girl." He looked past me and saw Julian. Julian did not look away. He stared right back at his father with a gaze of absolute, crushing disappointment. "Julian," Harrison stammered, "what are you doing with her? Why is she here? Security. Get this woman out of here. This is a closed meeting. My lead counsel, a man named Mr. Vance who charged $2,000 an hour, stepped forward and placed a heavy leather briefcase on the table. "Mr. Sterling," Vance said, his voice projecting to the back of the room. "Please sit down. You are addressing the majority shareholder of Aurora Holdings, the parent company of V Ventures, and the new owner of your debt." Harrison slumped back into his chair as if his strings had been cut. "Aurora," he gasped. I smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile the predator gives the prey right before the end. "Hello, Harrison," I said. "I believe we have some unfinished business regarding the definition of trash." The silence in the boardroom was not empty. It was pressurized. It was the kind of heavy, static-charged atmosphere that precedes a lightning strike. Harrison Sterling sat at the head of the long mahogany table, a throne he had occupied for 30 years, but today he looked less like a monarch and more like a prisoner awaiting a verdict he refused to believe was coming. I stood at the opposite end of the table, the double doors closing with a soft, final click behind my legal team. The white suit I wore was a beacon in the room of gray and black wool. It caught the light from the floor-to-ceiling windows, making me impossible to ignore. Behind me, Julian stood like a sentinel, his face unreadable, his eyes fixed on the man who had raised him. Harrison blinked. He leaned forward, squinting as if trying to bring a blurry image into focus. He looked at me, then at Julian, and then back to me. The recognition hit him slowly, filtered through layers of confusion and ingrained snobbery. He did not see a CEO. He did not see a predator. He saw the girl who sold paperbacks. He saw the trash he had discarded from his dinner table, his face contorted into a mask of incredulous outrage. "Security!" Harrison barked, his voice echoing too loudly in the acoustic stillness of the room. He looked frantically at the bank representatives and the expensive lawyers lining the walls. "Where is security? Why is the door not locked? Who let this person in here?" He stood up, his chair scraping violently against the parquet floor. He pointed a trembling finger at me. "You," he spat, the word dripping with disdain. "What are you doing here? Did you come to beg for Julian's allowance back, or are you lost? This is a boardroom, young lady, not a charity drive. Get out, now." I did not move. I did not speak. I simply watched him. I let his voice bounce off the glass walls, let his lack of composure hang in the air for everyone to see. The bankers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They knew who I was. They knew who held the deed to the debt. Watching Harrison berate me was like watching a man shout at an avalanche to stop falling. Harrison turned to his secretary, who was cowering in the corner. "Call the guards. Have this girl removed and take my son with her. If he wants to parade his failures in my office, he can do it from the sidewalk." "Mr. Sterling." The voice came from my right. It was Mr. Vance, my lead counsel. He stepped forward, placing his leather briefcase on the table with a heavy, dull thud. He adjusted his glasses, looking at Harrison with the dispassionate boredom of a coroner examining a corpse. "I would advise you to lower your voice," Vance said calmly. "And I would strongly suggest you show some respect to the new owner of this facility." Harrison froze. He looked at Vance, then looked around the room. He saw the heads of the bank representatives bowed, avoiding his gaze. He saw his own lawyers looking down at their files, refusing to defend him. A nervous, jagged laugh bubbled up from Harrison's throat. It was a terrible sound, high-pitched and brittle. "Owner?" Harrison scoffed, looking back at me with a twisted grin. This is a joke. Is this some kind of prank? Julian? Did you hire these actors to scare me?" He leaned over the table, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge. "She runs a bookstore. For God's sake," Harrison shouted, looking for an ally in the room. Anyone who would share in the absurdity of it. "She sells used novels to college students." "What did she do? Empty the cash register? Did she break her piggy bank? You cannot buy Sterling Heavy Industries with pocket change and good intentions." He shook his head, wiping sweat from his forehead. "This is ridiculous. Where are V Ventures? Where is Silas Thorne? I was told I was meeting with a serious institutional investor, not my son's charity case." I took a step forward. The sound of my heels striking the floor was sharp, singular. "V Ventures is here. Harrison," I said. My voice was low, smooth, and utterly devoid of the nervous tremor he remembered from dinner. It was the voice I used to negotiate with prime ministers and tech giants. I reached into the portfolio I was carrying. I pulled out a single, thick document, the merger agreement, bound in blue leather. On the cover, embossed in silver, were two logos. One was the stylized V of V Ventures. The other was the sweeping, illuminated horizon of Aurora Holdings. I tossed the document onto the table. It slid across the polished mahogany surface with a hiss, traveling the 20 feet between us with perfect momentum. It stopped exactly in front of Harrison, spinning slightly so the logos faced him. "Read the header," I commanded. Harrison looked down. He stared at the silver foil. Aurora Holdings, parent entity of V Ventures. His eyes flicked up to mine. "Aurora," he whispered. "The tech giant. The company that owns the—" He stopped. The blood drained from his face so fast, it looked like a physical vacuum had sucked it out. His mouth hung open. The connection fired in his brain. Aurora owned the technology. Aurora owned the logistics data. And most importantly, Aurora owned Blue Horizon, the company that held the lease on the ports his ships were currently banned from entering. "You," he breathed, "you are Aurora. I am the founder, the majority shareholder, and the CEO," I said, taking another slow step toward him. "And to answer your question, Harrison, no, I did not buy your company with money from selling books." I walked until I was standing right next to the bank representatives. I rested my hand on the back of a leather chair, looking down the table at him. "I bought your company," I continued, my voice hardening, "with the $300 million in port fees you have paid me over the last 5 years. I bought it with the licensing fees you pay for the tracking software on your ship's software my engineers wrote. I bought it with the interest payments you sent to the bank this morning, which were immediately rerouted to my accounts because I bought your debt at dawn." Harrison stumbled back, collapsing into his chair. He looked as if he had been punched in the gut. He looked at the document, then at me, trying to reconcile the image of the quiet girl in the black dress with the titan of industry standing before him in white. "But the bookstore," he stammered, his voice trembling. "The car, the clothes, you looked poor." "I looked normal," I corrected him. "You were just too blinded by your own reflection to see anything else. You assumed that because I did not wear my net worth on my wrist, I had none. You assumed that because I was polite, I was weak." I leaned forward, placing both hands on the table, leaning into his space from across the room. "You called me trash. Harrison, you said I polluted your table. You said I was dirt wrapped in gold." I paused, letting the silence stretch until it was almost unbearable. The only sound in the room was the hum of the air conditioning and Harrison's ragged breathing. "Well," I said softly, "the dirt just bought the ground you are standing on, and the trash just fired you." Harrison gripped the armrests of his chair. His eyes darted around the room, looking for an escape, looking for a logic that would make this a nightmare he could wake up from. But the lawyers were real. The document was real. The woman in the white suit was terrifyingly real. He tried to salvage it. I watched the gears turn in his desperate mind. He tried to summon the charm that had allowed him to fail upwards for 40 years. He forced a smile, a grotesque, wavering thing that looked more like a grimace of pain. "Now, Veronica," Harrison said, holding up a shaking hand, "let us all take a breath. This is a misunderstanding, a breakdown in communication." He tried to laugh again, but it came out as a cough. "The things I said at dinner, you have to understand. That was just banter. It was a test. Yes, a test. I wanted to see if you had the grit to be a Sterling. And look at you. You passed. You are incredible. Truly." He looked at Julian, his eyes pleading. "Julian, tell her how we joke in this family. It is just our way. We are intense people. Veronica. Darling, surely you can see that we are family now, partners. Imagine what we can do together. In my experience, your capital, we could run the ocean." I watched him squirm. It was pathetic. It was satisfying, but it was not enough. "Partners." I repeated the word, tasting the absurdity of it. "You think this is a partnership?" "Of course," Harrison insisted, sweating profusely now. "I can mentor you. I can introduce you to the right people. You have the money, sure, but you need the access. I have the connections. I can get you into the club. I bought the club, Harrison." I cut him off. He blinked. "What?" "The yacht club," I said effortlessly. "I bought the land it sits on 3 months ago for a development project. The board answers to me. Your membership was revoked this morning. Didn't you get the email?" Harrison looked like he was going to be sick. Every lever of power he thought he possessed: his business, his social standing. His name was evaporating in real time. "This is not a partnership," I said, straightening up and signaling to Mr. Vance. "This is a hostile takeover, and unlike you, I do not believe in keeping dead weight on the payroll." Mr. Vance opened a second folder. He pulled out a single sheet of paper and slid it down the table. It came to a rest next to the merger agreement. It was a termination notice. "Please," Harrison whispered, the fight draining out of him. "Do not do this. My father built this. My grandfather built this. And you broke it," I said. "You used it as a piggy bank. You raided the pension funds. You leveraged the assets to fund a lifestyle you could not afford. You did not build anything. Harrison, you are just the termite that ate the foundation." Harrison looked at Julian. "Son," he croaked, "help me. Talk to her. She is doing this for you. Isn't she? Tell her to stop. Tell her I'm your father." Julian stepped forward. He walked past me, past the lawyers, until he was standing next to his father's chair. He looked down at the man who had terrified him for his entire life. Harrison looked up, hope sparking in his eyes. "Julian." Julian reached out. For a second, Harrison thought he was going to offer a hand of comfort. Instead, Julian reached for the Sterling Industries lapel pin on Harrison's jacket, the gold pin that only the chairman was allowed to wear. Julian unclasped it. He removed it from Harrison's lapel. "You lost the right to wear this when you stole from the workers, Dad," Julian said quietly. He placed the pin on the table. "I am not here to save you," Julian said, his voice steady and final. "I am here to witness the eviction." Harrison stared at the pin on the table. The last symbol of his authority was gone. He looked back at me, his eyes wet, his lips trembling. "You cannot do this," he whispered hoarsely. "I am Sterling. I am the company." "Not anymore," I said. "Now, read the paper in front of you. Or don't. It does not matter. The locks have already been changed." I checked my watch. "You have 20 minutes to collect your personal effects," I said to the room, my voice ringing with absolute authority. "Security will escort you out. If you are not out of the building by 10:30, You will be removed for trespassing." I turned my back on him. I looked at the bank representatives, who were staring at me with a mixture of fear and awe. "Gentlemen," I said to them, "the debt is cleared. The funds were wired 5 minutes ago. We will discuss the restructuring of the credit lines on Monday. Until then, you are dismissed." They scrambled to pack their bags, eager to escape the carnage. Behind me, I heard the sound of a man weeping. It was not a loud, dramatic cry. It was the soft, broken sound of a reality shattering into a million pieces. Harrison Sterling, the billionaire who had sneered at the world, was sitting in a chair he no longer owned, crying over a life he had already lost. I did not turn around. I had one more thing to do. The extermination was complete. Now, it was time to clean the house. Harrison wiped his face with a silk handkerchief that was now stained with sweat and tears. He was trembling, but the instinct for self-preservation was a powerful drug. He sat up straighter in his chair, smoothing his tie, trying to reassemble the fragments of his dignity into something that resembled a negotiator. "Now, let us be reasonable," Harrison stammered, his voice wavering but gaining a desperate sort of speed. "Fine, you have the upper hand. I admit it. You played a good game, Veronica, a very aggressive game, but you cannot simply walk in here and decapitate the leadership. You need me. The shareholders know me. The banks know me. If you fire me, the stock will go to zero. You will be buying a corpse." He looked around the room, seeking validation from the empty chairs where the bankers had sat just moments ago. "I can explain the accounts," he continued, pointing a shaking finger at the termination notice. "Those withdrawals, the pension funds, that was temporary liquidity management. A standard practice. I was going to put it back. I always put it back. You are making a mountain out of a molehill to justify a vendetta." I did not say a word. I simply reached into my pocket and pulled out a small, sleek remote control. I pointed it at the massive projection screen behind Harrison's head, the screen that usually displayed his vanity metrics and inflated profit projections. I pressed the button. The room darkened slightly as the screen flared to life. It did not show a PowerPoint presentation. It showed a raw, unfiltered feed of the forensic accounting audit my team had completed at 3 o'clock that morning. "Do not speak to me about standard practice, Harrison," I said, my voice cutting through his babbling like a scalpel. "And do not waste your breath on lies. The data does not have an opinion, it just has a memory." I tapped the remote again. A timeline appeared on the screen, a jagged red line descending into an abyss. "This," I said, walking slowly along the length of the table, "is the real financial health of Sterling Heavy Industries over the last decade. You have not made a profit since 2016. Every quarterly report you released since then fraud. You have been shifting debt between shell companies to hide the losses. You have been paying dividends with loan principal." I stopped directly behind him. He refused to turn around and look at the screen, staring rigidly at the table, but he could not block out my voice. "And this," I said, clicking the remote again, bringing up a list of personal expenditures that made the lawyers in the room gasp, "is where the money went. It did not go into R&D. It did not go into fleet maintenance. It went to you." The screen was a catalog of gluttony. July 4th, 2023, $200,000, charter flight to Monaco. September 12th, 2023, $80,000, vintage wine auction. December 25th, 2023, $1.5 million, renovation of the Hampton Estate Guest House. You stole from the company to paint your walls. Harrison, I said, leaning down so my face was level with his ear. You raided the safety deposit box of your own employees so you could drink 1945 Romanée Conti while their pension checks bounced. Harrison flinched as if I had struck him. I earned that money. I am the CEO. I deserve a lifestyle that reflects the brand. The brand? I laughed, a cold, humorless sound. Let us talk about the brand. Let us talk about the name Sterling. I walked back to the head of the table and turned to face him. I wanted him to see me. I wanted him to see the trash he had dismissed. 2 nights ago, Over a dinner that cost more than my first car. You looked me in the eye and told me I was trash. I recounted, my voice steady but vibrating with intensity. You said I was dirt wrapped in gold. You said I did not belong at your table because I did not carry the name Sterling. You implied that your name was a currency, a guarantee of quality and class. I pointed the remote at the screen one last time. The image changed. It was a live ticker of the stock market. The symbol SHI Sterling. Heavy Industries was flashing red. The price was not just low, it was effectively non-existent. Look at the screen. Harrison, I commanded. He slowly lifted his eyes. $0.12. I read the number aloud. That is what the market thinks of the name Sterling right now. It is a penny stock. It is junk bond status. It is radioactive. I took a step closer. You called me trash, but trash has no value. Trash is something you discard. Yet, here I am, the owner of everything you see. And there you are, holding a name that cannot even buy you a cup of coffee in this lobby. Harrison stared at the ticker, his mouth working silently. The reality of the number was undeniable. His identity was tied to that stock price. If the stock was zero, he was zero. I bought the float. Harrison, I explained, mercilessly peeling back the layers of his defeat. Every share that was panic sold this morning, my algorithms bought them. I own 98% of the outstanding equity. The name Sterling does not belong to you anymore. It belongs to me. And do you know what I am going to do with it? I am going to erase it. No, he whispered, shaking his head. You cannot, my father. Your father is dead, I said, and his legacy died the moment you decided that your vanity was more important than your integrity. Harrison looked around the room, his eyes wild and wet. He looked at the lawyers, who were studiously ignoring him. He looked at the empty chairs. Finally, his gaze landed on Julian. Julian was standing by the window, his back straight, watching the scene with a detached sorrow. Julian, Harrison pleaded, his voice cracking into a sob. Julian, look at this. Look at what she is doing to me. She is humiliating me. She is destroying our family name. You cannot let her do this. I am your father. We are blood. Tell her to stop. Tell her we can work this out. He reached out a hand toward his son, a gesture of supplication that was pathetic coming from a man who had bullied his son for 30 years. Think of the holidays. Julian, think of the summer house. I did it all for you. I wanted you to inherit an empire. Julian turned his head slowly. He looked at his father's outstretched hand, then up at his father's tear-stained face. There was no anger in Julian's eyes anymore. There was only a profound, icy distance. You did not do it for me, Julian said, his voice calm and clear. You did it for yourself. You wanted a clone, not a son. You wanted an audience, not a family. How can you say that? Harrison cried. I gave you everything. You gave me things, Julian corrected him. You gave me expensive schools and expensive suits and expensive expectations. But you never gave me respect. You never gave me a choice. And you certainly never gave me an example of how to be a good man. I am your father, Harrison screamed, slamming his hand on the table. And I am the chief strategy officer of Aurora Holdings, Julian replied, cold as the grave. I am here as an advisor to Ms. Lancaster. I am not here as your son. My father died a long time ago. Harrison, he died the day I realized he loved his reflection more than he loved his wife. Harrison recoiled. He slumped back into his chair, the energy draining out of him. His own son had just disowned him in front of a room full of strangers. The final emotional lever he had tried to pull had snapped in his hand. Fine, Harrison whispered, looking down at his lap. Fine, you have the company, you have the stock. Take it, I will leave. I will retire to the Hamptons. I still have my properties. I still have my art. I will live out my days away from you ungrateful vultures. I let out a short, incredulous laugh. I walked over to the table and picked up the blue merger document I had thrown at him earlier. I flipped it open to page 42, the page containing the clause I had personally drafted with Mr. Vance. "The Hamptons?" I asked, feigning confusion. "Harrison, you seem to be laboring under a delusion that you still own things." He looked up, wary. "What do you mean?" "The house is in my name. Personal property." "Was in your name," I corrected, "until you signed the loan guarantees in 2018. Do you remember? You were short on cash for the fleet expansion, so you put up your personal assets as collateral for the corporate debt." Harrison's face went white. "That was a formality. The bank never exercised it." "The bank did not," I agreed, "because the bank did not want the hassle of liquidating a mansion. But I am not a bank. Harrison, I am a woman who pays her debts, and I am a woman who ensures justice is served." I pointed to the screen again. A new graphic appeared. It showed a transfer of funds, a massive injection of capital moving from the Sterling estate accounts into the Employee Pension Trust. "You stole $12 million from the workers," I said, my voice hard as diamond. "That money is gone, spent on jets and wine, but the workers still need to be paid. So, I made an executive decision as the new owner of the debt." I leaned in close, ensuring he heard every syllable. "I exercised the collateral clause 10 minutes ago. I seized your Hampton estate. I seized the penthouse in London. I seized your vintage car collection, and I liquidated your personal investment portfolio." You cannot," he gasped, clutching his chest. "I can, and I did," I said. "I took every penny of equity you had in those properties, and I transferred it directly into the Sterling Employee Pension Fund. You did not just lose your job today. Harrison, you paid back every single cent you stole." I stood up straight, towering over him. "The workers are fully funded as of 9 o'clock this morning. Their retirement is secure. And the cost was your legacy." Harrison looked at me with horror. He was doing the math in his head. The house, the cars, the accounts. "But that is everything," he whispered. "That is everything I have." "Correction," I said mercilessly. "That was everything you had stolen. You have been bankrupt for years. Harrison, you have been living on credit, borrowing against assets you had already leveraged, spending money that belonged to your employees. You called me a parasite. You called me a gold digger." I shook my head, looking at him with pure disgust. "You are the parasite. You are the one who has been sucking the blood out of this company to keep your cheeks rosy. You are the one who has been eating at a table you could not afford to sit at. I am just the exterminator." Harrison made a low, guttural moan of absolute despair. He tried to stand up, but his legs gave way. He collapsed back into the chair, sliding down slightly. His posture broken. The arrogance was gone. The snobbery was gone. All that was left was a frightened, empty old man in a suit that suddenly looked 3 sizes too big for him. He looked at his hands that had never done a day of hard labor in their life. Hands that were now empty. "I have nothing," he mumbled. "I am destitute." "You are not destitute," I said, my voice softening just a fraction, not out of pity, but out of finality. "You have your freedom, which is more than you would have had if I had turned this file over to the FBI instead of handling it internally. You are not going to prison. Harrison, consider that my final gift to Julian." I turned to the security guard standing by the door. "Escort Mr. Sterling to the exit," I ordered. "He is no longer an employee, a shareholder, or a property owner. He is a visitor, and visiting hours are over." 2 burly guards stepped forward. Harrison did not fight them. He did not scream. He let them pull him up by his arms. He looked like a rag doll. He cast one last longing look at the head of the table. At the view of the city, he used to think he ruled. Then, he looked at me. There was no hatred in his eyes anymore, only fear. The fear of a man who has to walk out into a world he has spent 60 years looking down on, only to realize he is now at the very bottom of it. "Goodbye, Harrison," I said. The guards turned him around and marched him out. The double doors swung shut behind him. silencing the sound of his shuffling feet. The room was quiet. I looked at the screen, where the stock ticker was still flashing red. I picked up the remote and turned it off. The screen went black. The debt was paid. The cancer was cut out. I looked at Julian. He was still standing by the window, but his shoulders had dropped. The tension of a lifetime had finally been released. "It is done," I said. "It is done," he repeated. But we were not finished yet. The destruction was the easy part. Now came the cleanup. The ink on the final signature page was still wet, gleaming black under the harsh fluorescent lights of the boardroom. I capped the fountain pen, a heavy, platinum-barreled instrument that belonged to the law firm, and set it down with a deliberate, audible click. It was 10:45 in the morning, the entire hostile takeover. From the moment I walked through the doors to the moment I legally possessed the soul of the corporation, had taken less than 45 minutes. I looked down at the document. The text was dense, a fortress of legal jargon, but the meaning was simple. Sterling Heavy Industries was no longer an independent entity. It was now a wholly owned subsidiary of Aurora Holdings. The king was dead. Long live the queen. I stood up, smoothing the front of my white blazer. The room was deathly quiet. The air conditioning hummed, sounding like the life support system of a dying patient. Around the table, the remaining members of the board men who had spent years nodding at Harrison's bad ideas and eating his catered lunches sat frozen in their chairs. They were waiting to see if the guillotine was sharp. It was, "Mr. Vance?" I said, addressing my lead counsel without looking away from the terrified faces of the board members. "Please file the articles of amendment immediately. As of this moment, the name Sterling Heavy Industries is retired." A gasp rippled through the room. The name had been on the building for 80 years. It was etched into the stone, printed on the letterhead, and stitched into the carpets. "We are rebranding," I announced, my voice projecting clear and cold to the back of the room. "The new entity will be known as Phoenix Logistics. We are burning the rot out of this foundation so that something functional can rise from it." I turned my gaze to Marcus, the chief financial officer. He was a weasel of a man with thinning hair and a suit that was too expensive for his reported salary. He had been Harrison's right hand, the magician who moved the debt around to hide the losses. He was currently trying to make himself look very small. "Marcus," I said. He jumped. "Ms. Lancaster, I want you to know that I have all the files ready for the transition. I can walk you through the... You can walk yourself to the elevator." I cut him off. "You are fired." Marcus blinked, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "Excuse me, you cannot fire me. I am the CFO. I know where the bodies are buried." "I know where they are buried too, Marcus," I said, signaling to Mr. Vance, "because I dug them up. My forensic accountants found the offshore shell accounts you set up to funnel the pension money. We found the kickbacks from the fuel suppliers. We found the falsified tax returns." I picked up a folder from the table and tossed it toward him. "This is not a negotiation," I said. "This is a termination for cause. That means no severance package, no golden parachute, no vesting of your stock options, and no reference letter. You are leaving this building with nothing but the potential for a federal indictment if you do not cooperate with our internal investigation." Marcus turned pale green. He looked at Harrison, who was still slumped in his chair at the end of the table, flanked by security guards, looking like a man who had survived a plane crash only to realize he was stranded on a desert island. "Harrison," I said, shifting my focus to the main event. Harrison Sterling looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed and hollow. He was still processing the loss of his personal fortune, the seizure of his estate, the total annihilation of his ego. But there was one final Band-Aid to rip off. "I am officially relieving you of your duties as chairman and chief executive officer," I stated. "Effective immediately. Your access cards have been deactivated. Your company credit cards have been canceled. Your email account has been archived for legal review." Harrison stood up, his legs shaking. The reality of the administrative violence I was inflicting on him was finally piercing through his shock. "You cannot just kick me out," Harrison stammered, his voice rising in pitch. I am the founder's grandson. I have rights. I have a contract. My contract stipulates a $20 million payout if I am removed without a shareholder vote. The shareholders did vote, I reminded him, tapping the stack of documents. I am the shareholder, and the vote was unanimous. As for your contract, Clause 17, Section C, gross misconduct and breach of fiduciary duty nullifies all financial obligations of the company to the executive. I walked toward him, stopping just outside of striking distance. I wanted him to feel the space between us, the chasm between the power he thought he had and the power I actually held. You get nothing, Harrison, I said softly. No $20 million, no consulting fee, no office. You do not even get to keep the company phone. This is my building, Harrison screamed, snapping. The facade of the polite aristocrat finally crumbled completely. He slammed his fist onto the table, overturning a glass of water. My grandfather laid the cornerstone of this building in 1945. My name is on the front. You cannot come in here with your new money and your lawyers and throw me out of my own home. I am Sterling. I am this company. He looked deranged. His tie was crooked, his hair was wild, and spittle flew from his lips. He lunged toward me, his hands reaching out as if he wanted to strangle the truth back into a shape he could recognize. Security, I said calmly. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I did not need to. 2 uniformed guards stepped forward instantly, intercepting Harrison before he could take 2 steps. They grabbed him by the arms, their grip firm and practiced. Harrison struggled against them, twisting his body. Get your hands off me. Do you know who I am? I pay your salaries. I am the one who hired you. Unhand me this instant. One of the guards, a man named Miller, who had worked at the front desk for 15 years, looked at Harrison with a stone-faced expression. Actually, Mr. Sterling, Miller said, his voice flat. Mrs. Lancaster pays our salaries now, and she gave us a raise 10 minutes ago. Harrison froze. He looked at Miller. Really looked at him. Perhaps for the first time in 15 years. He saw the lack of deference. He saw the contempt. He realized that the loyalty he thought he commanded was actually just a transaction. And I had just outbid him. You turncoat, Harrison hissed. You ungrateful peasant. That is enough, I said, stepping into his line of sight. Miller, escort him out. He has 30 minutes to collect his personal effects from his office, and I want you to supervise him. He takes photographs and personal documents only. If he tries to take a stapler, if he tries to take a hard drive, if he tries to take a single paperclip that belongs to Phoenix Logistics, you arrest him for theft. Understood, ma'am, Miller said. 30 minutes. Harrison gasped. It will take me days to pack my office. I have art. I have sculptures. The art belongs to the company, I corrected him. You bought it with company funds. It stays. The sculptures stay. The furniture stays. You can take the picture of your dog and your coat. That is it. I leaned in closer to him. The room was watching. Julian was watching. This was the epitaph of his career. You have spent your entire life thinking that the world owes you something because of your last name, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that only he could hear. You thought you could treat people like furniture. You thought you could treat me like trash. Harrison was breathing hard, his chest heaving against the guard's restraint. He looked at me with a mixture of hatred and terror. You are a monster, he whispered. I am a mirror. Harrison, I replied. I am just reflecting your own greed back at you. I reached out and adjusted the lapel of his jacket, which had been ruffled in the scuffle. It was a gesture of mocking intimacy. Next time, I whispered, looking deep into his watery blue eyes. When you meet someone, try looking at their eyes instead of their shoes. You might see the person who is going to sign your pink slip. I stepped back. Get him out of here. The guards turned him around. Harrison tried to dig his heels into the carpet, but he was an old man against 2 professionals. They marched him toward the double doors. Julian, Harrison shouted over his shoulder. One last desperate plea. Julian, do something. Do not let them do this to your father. Julian did not move. He stood by the window, his hands in his pockets, watching the scene with a tragic kind of resolve. He did not look away, but he did not intervene. He let the consequences happen. The doors swung open, and Harrison Sterling was dragged out of the boardroom of the company he had destroyed. I turned back to the table. The remaining board members were staring at me as if I might incinerate them with a glance. Now, I said, my voice returning to a professional, businesslike tone. Let us discuss the transition strategy. We have a lot of work to do to reassure the markets. 30 minutes later, I stood on the balcony of the executive floor, looking down at the plaza below. Julian joined me. He held 2 cups of coffee cheap, bodega coffee that he must have sent an intern to fetch. He handed one to me. To Phoenix Logistics, he said quietly, clinking his paper cup against mine. To the future, I replied. We looked down. The front doors of the building opened. A phalanx of security guards emerged, creating a path through the crowd of striking workers. Then, Harrison appeared. He was carrying a small cardboard box. He was not wearing his overcoat. It was draped over his arm. He looked small. He looked defeated. The moment he stepped onto the sidewalk, the flashbulbs erupted. I had tipped off the financial press at 8 o'clock. They were all there, CNBC, Bloomberg, the Wall Street Journal. Photographers swarmed the line, their cameras clicking furiously. Mr. Sterling, is it true you have been ousted? Mr. Sterling, what about the pension fund allegations? Harrison, look this way. Harrison tried to shield his face with the cardboard box. It was a pathetic shield against the glare of public scrutiny. The workers, seeing their oppressor reduced to a man with a box, began to jeer. Hey Harrison, where's your yacht now? Give us our money. Na. Hey. Goodbye. The chant picked up steam. It echoed off the glass facades of the skyscrapers. Harrison stumbled. He almost dropped his box. He looked around for his driver, for his limousine, for the cocoon of luxury that had always protected him, but the limousine was gone. I had ordered the driver to return the vehicle to the company garage. He was alone on the sidewalk. He had to hail a taxi. I watched as Harrison Sterling, the billionaire industrialist, stood on the curb, waving his hand desperately at passing yellow cabs. One after another passed him by. Finally, a battered taxi pulled over. Harrison threw his box into the back seat and scrambled in after it, fleeing the scene of his demise like a criminal fleeing a bank robbery. The taxi merged into traffic and disappeared into the sea of yellow and steel. I took a sip of my coffee. It was bitter, hot, and absolutely delicious. Are you okay? I asked Julian. He watched the spot where the taxi had vanished. He took a deep breath, inhaling the smog and the cold city air. I feel, he paused, searching for the word. I feel lighter. It is like gravity just let go. He is gone. Julian, I said. He cannot hurt you anymore, and he cannot hurt the company anymore. You saved the pensions? Julian asked, turning to me. Every cent, I confirmed. I liquidated his personal holdings. The employees will see the funds in their accounts by Monday morning. The strike will end by lunch. Julian smiled. It was a real smile, reaching his eyes. You are terrifying. You know that... I am efficient, I corrected him. There is a difference. What happens now? He asked. The board is gone. The CEO is gone. The company is a shell. Now, I said, turning away from the balcony and looking back toward the office where my team was already beginning the work of rebuilding. Now we clean up the mess. We modernize the fleet. We implement the new logistics software. We turn this dinosaur into a spaceship. I walked back inside, the heels of my shoes clicking on the marble floor. The purge was complete. The toxicity had been excised. The building felt different. It felt clean. I sat down at the head of the boardroom table, the seat Harrison had occupied for decades. It was just a chair, It was leather and wood and foam. It held no magic. It held no power other than what the person sitting in it brought to the table. I spun the chair around to face the window. "Elena," I said into my headset, "get the PR team on the line. I want to issue a statement." "Ready when you are, boss," Elena replied. "Draft a press release," I dictated. Headline: Phoenix Logistics Rises. Subtitle: A New Era of Transparency and Integrity. Announce the full restitution of the pension funds. Announce the strategic partnership with Aurora. And announce the appointment of the new executive team. "And who is the new CEO?" Elena asked. I looked at Julian. He was standing in the doorway, looking at the architectural models of the ships on the shelf. He was tracing the lines of the hull with his finger. He had ideas. He had vision. He just needed the space to breathe. "Hold on that," I said to Elena. "I have one more contract to write." I looked at the empty cardboard box Harrison had left behind in his haste trash. He hadn't even bothered to take with him. The purge was over. The building phase was about to begin. And for the first time in 100 years, the company was going to be run by people who knew the value of $1 and the value of a human being. Harrison was right about one thing, I said to the empty room. Trash really does exist. He just was confused about who the trash was and who the sanitation department was. I opened my laptop. The screen glowed with the green numbers of the Aurora stock, which was already climbing on the news of the acquisition. The market loved a winner, and today we had won everything. The office was finally silent. For 30 years, this room had been a shrine to the ego of Harrison Sterling. It had been cluttered with self-congratulatory plaques, taxidermied hunting trophies from trips he never actually took, and oil paintings that made him look like a Napoleonic general. Now, at 5 o'clock on a Friday evening, it was beautifully, starkly empty. The movers had been efficient. The walls were bare. The heavy velvet curtains had been pulled back to let in the golden light of the setting sun, revealing a view of the harbor that Harrison had claimed to own but never actually looked at. The desk, a monstrosity of carved oak, was cleared of everything except my laptop and a single folder. I stood by the window, looking out at the city. The chaos of the morning had settled into the rhythmic hum of the evening commute. The strikers were gone, their signs replaced by the feeling of relief that comes with a promised paycheck. The press trucks had packed up, having captured their footage of the fallen king. The door opened behind me. I did not turn around immediately. I knew the cadence of those footsteps. They were not the heavy, stomping tread of Harrison, nor the scurrying panic of his sycophants. They were steady, calm, and familiar. "I brought provisions," Julian said. I turned. He was standing in the doorway, holding 2 cardboard cups from the bodega around the corner from my old bookstore. It was cheap, slightly burnt roast coffee that tasted like charcoal and comfort. It was the coffee we used to drink on park benches when we were pretending to be 2 people struggling to pay rent. He walked over and handed me a cup. $3 for 2, he said with a small smile. I figured we should start watching the corporate budget immediately. An excellent fiscal decision, I replied. Taking the cup, the warmth seeped into my cold hands. The shareholders will be pleased. We stood side by side, sipping the bitter coffee. Looking down at the street 50 stories below, the height made everything look like a toy set. The cars were matchbox models. The people were specks of dust. "There he is," Julian said softly. I followed his gaze. Down on the curb, a solitary figure was struggling to fit a cardboard box into the trunk of a yellow taxi. From this height, Harrison Sterling was just a man in a rumpled suit. Stripped of the retinue of assistants and security guards that had insulated him from reality for decades, he looked clumsy. He looked ordinary. We watched as the taxi merged into the river of traffic, a yellow drop disappearing into the ocean of the city. There was no lightning strike. The world did not stop turning because Harrison Sterling had lost his crown. The traffic lights changed, the pedestrians walked, and the sun continued to set. "Do you feel it?" Julian asked, his eyes still fixed on the spot where the taxi had vanished. "Feel what?" "The guilt," he said. He turned to look at me, his expression open and vulnerable. I watched my father get thrown out of his own building today. I watched him beg. Part of me, the part of me that is still a little boy waiting for him to come home and play catch, feels like I just committed a crime. I placed my coffee cup on the windowsill and turned to face him fully. I reached out and took his hands. They were warm, solid. "Julian," I said firmly, "you did not commit a crime. You stopped one. Regret is natural because you are a good man. You have empathy. Harrison weaponized that empathy against you for years. He counted on you feeling too guilty to ever stop him." I looked deep into his eyes, willing him to understand the difference between cruelty and necessity. "I did not destroy a father today," I continued. "I removed a malignant tumor that was killing this company and, more importantly, was killing the spirit of the man I love. If we had let him stay, he would have drained the pension fund until it was dry. He would have framed you for his failures. He would have dragged you down with the ship just so he would have someone to blame as he drowned." Julian sighed, a long exhale that seemed to release the tension of a lifetime. He looked back at the empty desk. "You are right," he admitted. "I know you are right. It just feels strange. The monster under the bed is gone, and now the room is just a room. It is a blank slate," I said, "and that is terrifying in its own way. But it is better than a cage." Julian squeezed my hands. A slow, mischievous smile spread across his face, replacing the melancholy. "So," he said, tilting his head, "the trash now owns the building. The dirt wrapped in gold holds the deed to the entire estate. What does the new owner intend to do with her empire? Are you going to buy a bigger yacht? Maybe commission a statue of yourself for the lobby?" I laughed. It felt good to laugh. The tension of the boardroom, the icy precision of the takeover, it all melted away, leaving just Veronica. "I have enough statues," I said. "And I get seasick on yachts. No, I have a different plan." I walked over to the desk and picked up the single folder I had left there. It was thick, filled with architectural renderings and cost analysis spreadsheets. I held it out to him. "What is this?" Julian asked. Taking it. "Open it," I urged. He flipped open the cover. His eyes widened as he recognized the drawings. They were blueprints. But they were not blueprints for a new luxury condo tower or a commercial shopping center. They were designs for a sustainable, high-density housing project integrated with community green spaces and localized solar grids. It was a project designed to provide dignified, affordable living for the working class specifically, for the dock workers and their families. It was Julian's senior thesis from architecture school, the project he had poured his soul into, the project Harrison had laughed at, called communist garbage, and thrown into the fireplace. "You kept these," Julian whispered, his voice trembling. "I thought they were destroyed. I thought—" "You scanned them," I reminded him. "You sent them to me 5 years ago, back when we first started dating. You said it was a pipe dream. I saved them on my private server." I tapped the page. "I had my engineering team at Aurora run the structural analysis last night," I said. "The design is sound. The cost is viable. We own the land, the old warehouse district near the port that Harrison was letting rot for a tax write-off. We can break ground in 3 months." Julian looked up from the pages, tears shining in his eyes. He looked at me with a mixture of awe and absolute adoration. "You want to build this?" he asked. "This is not a profit generator. Veronica, this is legacy," I interrupted him. "Real legacy, not a name on a building, but a roof over a family's head. We are going to rebrand Sterling Heavy Industries as Phoenix Logistics, yes. But we are also going to launch the Phoenix Initiative. We are going to rebuild the community that your father exploited. We are going to show them that profit and purpose can exist in the same sentence." "We?" Julian asked. "We," I confirmed. I picked up the final document from the desk. It was an executive appointment contract. "I cannot run this company. Julian," I said, "I have Aurora to run. I have a global tech empire that requires my attention. I need someone I can trust to take the helm here. Someone who understands the soul of this place, Someone who knows how to build things that last. I handed him the pen. I am appointing myself chairman of the board, I explained. But the position of chief executive officer is vacant. I need a CEO who is not afraid to get his hands dirty. I need a CEO who knows that the workers are the engine, not the fuel. I looked at him, challenging him, inviting him. I need an architect, Julian, not just for buildings, but for the future. Julian looked at the contract. It was his name printed there. Julian Sterling, CEO. But this time, the name Sterling didn't feel like a burden. It felt like an opportunity to redeem the word. He picked up the pen. He did not hesitate. He signed his name with a flourish, a signature that was bold and assertive, nothing like the cramped, fearful writing of his father. Done, he said, setting the pen down. Done. I agreed. He walked around the desk and pulled me into his arms. He kissed me, not with the desperation of the morning, but with the steady, burning passion of a man who has finally found his home. You are incredible, he murmured against my lips. My billionaire bookseller. And you are the boss, I smiled, smoothing his lapel. So get to work. You have a housing project to build. Yes, ma'am. He saluted playfully. We walked out of the office together, leaving the door open. We did not need to lock it. There were no secrets left to hide. As we stepped into the elevator, leaving the ghost of Harrison Sterling behind in the gathering dusk, I thought about his final words to me. He had called me trash. He had believed that people were defined by their pedigree, by their blood, by the arbitrary circumstances of their birth. He was wrong, but he was also right about one thing. Trash does exist. Trash is the man who steals from the poor to feed his greed. Trash is the father who sacrifices his son for his vanity. Trash is the belief that you are better than everyone else simply because you sit at the head of the table. The elevator doors closed, sealing us in the warm, golden light of the future. Harrison had been right that trash existed. He had just made a fatal error in identifying it. He thought the trash was the woman sitting across from him. He never looked in the mirror to see that he was the one rotting from the inside out. And as for me, I was not the trash. I was simply the sanitation department. And I had just finished the biggest cleanup of my career. The city awaited us. The port lights were flickering on in the distance, signaling the start of the night shift. The ships were moving again. The cranes were turning. The world was moving forward, cleansed and renewed. We held hands as the elevator descended, ready to walk out into the street not as predators or prey, but as builders. Thank you so much for listening to this story. It has been a journey of revenge, justice, and rebuilding, and I hope you enjoyed every moment of Veronica's triumph as much as I enjoyed writing it. I would love to hear from you. Please leave a comment down below and tell me where you're listening to this story from right now. Are you listening on your commute, at home, or maybe during a coffee break? Let's get a conversation started in the comments section. If you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing to the channel, Sweet Rose Drama. Hit that like button if you want to see more powerful female leads taking down corrupt empires, and do not forget to press the hype button to help this story reach more people. Your support means the world to us and helps us keep creating the content you love. Until next time, stay strong and keep building your own empire.